the basic plots of all Bond pictures are highly sophisticated, but you must tell it in international terms. Adventure, excitement, pretty girls, laughs, thrills, suspense, all part of our youth, all part of something that, to a large extent, the cinema has lost. We try to put those things back.
To us, Mr. Bond. We are the best.
Within fandoms, it's not uncommon for a sort of consensus to form around the different entries in a series. You know, these ones are good, these ones are bad, and these ones we never talk about. And of course, this is true for James Bond as well. Everyone has their own different favourites, of course, but you tend to see the same handful of movies topping the rankings. But one of the titles you will almost never see in a top 10 list is The Man with the Golden Gun. In fact, it's far more common to see it kicking around the bottom. This is, after all, the Bond movie that has the second lowest critical consensus score on Rotten Tomatoes, and its box office take is one of the worst in the history of the series. And when you ask fans why they dislike it, they tend to point to things like Roger Moore's unusually flat performance, or the terrible song, or Sheriff Pepper, or the uneven tone, or the ditzy Bond girl, or Sheriff Pepper, or the way it puts a silly sound effect on the big stunt, or its non-cinematic aspect ratio, or it's just because of Sheriff Pepper. And look, I will be the first to acknowledge that this is far from a perfect Bond movie, but warts and all, I unashamedly love it. Slide whistle or no, it still has a fantastic car chase, a boat chase, and plenty of fistfights along the way, while the final showdown stands out for being one that is a test of Bond's wits, not strength. Despite Ken Adam not working on the film, it still has some brilliantly creative sets, and it makes full use of its locations in a way that brings that classic Bond sense of adventure to the story. It has the most unique Bond henchman, one of the funniest Bond girls, as well as one of the most tragic, and of course, it has Sheriff Pepper. But towering above all of that, literally, is the one and only Sir Christopher Lee as one of the all-time great James Bond villains. We'll get to all of that, but I should admit up front that this movie holds a particularly special place in my heart because, at least as far as I can remember, this was the first James Bond movie I ever saw. Like many children of the 90s, my household had various movies recorded off the TV onto old VHS tapes, and there were a handful of Bond movies among them, and for some reason this was the one I kept coming back to over and over again. To this day, when I watch it, I still half expect it to cut away to adverts every 20 minutes or so.
Furbies! The adorable interactive friend, now just $69.99 each.
So yes, consider this retrospective to be somewhat biased by my nostalgia for the movie, but I wanted to say this at the start because I don't think I'm alone in this. In fact, I think that the age at which you first saw this movie is probably the single biggest thing that determines your opinion of it. If you first watched this when you were 9 or 10, then chances are you have a soft spot for Golden Gun, whereas if you discovered the series as an adult, I can see why you may not enjoy this one as much. But putting those rose-tinted glasses to one side, I can understand why this is generally regarded as a bad Bond movie. But like every Bond, there is still a lot to love about it, and so in its 50th anniversary year, let's crack into a bottle of Fooyak and take a look at why, in my opinion, The Man with the Golden Gun is the best bad Bond movie.
To this moment, and the moment yet to come.
Like with all of the early Bond films, the starting point for this story was of course Ian Fleming's novel of the same name. But in the same way Bond film fans tend to place Golden Gun at the bottom of their rankings, so too do Fleming fans generally rank this as among his weakest. To me, it reads a lot like one of Fleming's short stories, just stretched out into the length of a novel. I think it lacks a lot of the detail and description that makes reading some of the other Bond books such a delight, while the plot feels a bit small scale for a novel-length Bond adventure. But there's good reason for this, because Golden Gun was in fact the last novel Fleming wrote, or at least half wrote. In the final years of his life, Fleming was battling increasingly serious health issues and felt like he had, quote, run out of puff with the Bond character. He was convinced by his publisher to write another story, and Golden Gun is the result, but in Fleming's mind, it was unfinished. He only submitted the first draft to his editor with plans to rework it in due course, but he would never have the chance to do so. Fleming died on the 12th of August 1964, and 8 months later, Golden Gun was published to a fairly lukewarm reception a few months before Thunderball was released in cinemas. And the first moves to adapt Golden Gun actually came just 2 years later during the filming of You Only Live Twice. That was supposed to have been Connery's last one as Bond, and producers Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman had lined up Roger Moore to take on the mantle of 007 for the 6th James Bond movie, which was to have been based on The Man with the Golden Gun. But of course, this was not to be.
they were going to shoot in Cambodia, and that was the time that all hell broke loose in Cambodia. And so this was shelved, the script that they had.
Because of that delay, Roger Moore had to move on to film another season of The Saint, and so the job of replacing Sean Connery went to the other fella. And while I would love to have seen a version of this movie set in 1960s Cambodia, directed by Peter Hunt and starring a younger Roger Moore, I will very much take OHMSS as consolation. No, it would end up being another 6 years and 3 Bond films later that Eon Productions would finally come to adapt Golden Gun into their 9th James Bond adventure. But it bears little resemblance to Fleming's story, taking little more than its title, Merry Goodnight, and the villain being an assassin called Francisco Scaramanga. But this meant that the filmmakers were in uncharted waters. The starting point for every other Bond film to date had been Fleming's writing, and even though the final stories often ended up being quite different, each of the Bond films had still relied on a Fleming novel for things like the setting, key scenes, and major characters. Here, they were flying blind, and they were flying quickly. Live and Let Die had done surprisingly well at the box office, and United Artists wanted work to start on the follow-up immediately. Even Cubby Broccoli, who normally leapt straight into work on the next Bond movie, admitted that it was rushed, saying,
"We were on a tight time schedule, and I chose to go along with United Artists rather than improve our position story-wise and production-wise."
And part of the reason for that is the fact that Broccoli and his longtime producing partner Harry Saltzman were increasingly falling out on a personal and professional level. Saltzman was facing a number of personal financial challenges, some of which were threatening Eon Productions as a business, while his wife Jacqueline had been diagnosed with terminal cancer a year earlier and was becoming increasingly sick. Saltzman would go on to formally step away from Bond after this movie, but largely took a back seat during its production, leaving Cubby Broccoli to take the lead. Goldfinger director Guy Hamilton was brought back on board, having also helmed the last 2 Bond films. Eon wanted to try and recapture the magic of Goldfinger while also ensuring some continuity from Roger Moore's successful debut in Live and Let Die. So this was the first time the same director had led 3 back-to-back Bond movies, and I do think that this resulted in an element of people just kind of going through the motions with Golden Gun. That's not to say I think anyone involved was being lazy or not giving it all their efforts, it's more that when you watch this movie, it's hard not to feel like there was a sense of fatigue creeping in. After all, the production team behind most of the Bond films had remained largely the same film to film, and they had been putting one of these out roughly every 18 months or so for over 10 years at this point. As we've already seen, they started work on Golden Gun almost immediately after Live and Let Die wrapped, and with things moving at such a pace, it's hard for that sense of tiredness not to make its way onto the screen in some way. The first challenge they faced was just finding a suitable location for the movie. The novel was set in Jamaica, but having already done the Caribbean 3 times, that was ruled out, as was America and Europe. Instead, the team looked to the Middle East, especially Iran, and so just a few months after Live and Let Die had been released, Cubby Broccoli led a small group out to recce possible locations for the next movie. Here's screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz talking about how that went.
We had seen this short film by a French filmmaker, Lamouris, and at the end, this little fox ran across the desert toward this lost city. And we said, my God, what a place to shoot. We flew to Iran. We ran around the corner of mountains to the lost city of Bam, and it was the wrong city. And Cubby said, forget it. And we're flying back, and the thermal updrafts are unbelievable in this plane, and we're bouncing. I mean, I just thought we're never going to get out of this. And I said to Cubby, when we get back, we should ask Lamouris where he shot it. We never thought about calling him, and Cubby said, he's dead. And I said, how did he die? He said, in a plane accident in Iran. And all of a sudden, we hear on the loudspeaker, the intercom, and these phantom jets go by. And I said, what's going on with that? And the pilot said, Israel has just declared war on Egypt. The Ramadan War had started. We decided not to go back to Iran to shoot.
Guy Hamilton was attracted to the islands of Vietnam's Ha Long Bay, but for obvious reasons, Vietnam was not a viable filming location in 1974. But 1,000 miles southwest, the team came across an almost identical landscape off the coast of Phuket in Thailand's Phang Nga Bay. So they had found their location, now they needed a script. The job fell to Tom Mankiewicz, who, like Guy Hamilton, was now on his 3rd Bond film in about as many years. In late 1973, he submitted the draft screenplay to Cubby Broccoli, but then he resigned. Like Ian Fleming himself a decade earlier, Mankiewicz felt like he had reached his limit with the Bond character, saying,
"This was the 3rd in a row I had done, and I was feeling like I was writing the same scene over and over again."
Remember what I was saying about people feeling tired? After Mankiewicz resigned, Bond veteran Richard Maybaum was brought back in to finalise Mankiewicz's draft into the movie that we know today. It was Maybaum who added the plot thread around solar power, but of course, the real heart of this story is the title character. Besides his name and some of the backstory, the character of Francisco Scaramanga in the movie is completely different from his portrayal in the book. In an interview, Christopher Lee said of him,
"The character in the book is a great ox of a man. He's really just a thug. He has no charm at all. He's just a thug who kills with a golden gun, and there's nothing more to him than that. In fact, he's one of the least well-written characters in all Fleming's books. The way the character comes out in the script is infinitely superior."
I totally agree with him. See, up until this point, most Bond villains had been the typical megalomaniac evil geniuses with designs on world domination, accompanied by a tough guy henchman to do their dirty work. But in Scaramanga, Maybaum and Mankiewicz formed a villain who was a dark mirror to Bond, a charming, sophisticated killer who was more than capable of taking on Bond himself, but who could also make Bond question his morals, his motives, and even his methods. And who better to play him than the one and only Sir Christopher Lee? It was perhaps inevitable that cinema's most famous bad guy actor would play a Bond villain, but I'm just so glad that it was this character. Because history could have been very different. Lee was in fact first offered the role of Dr. No by none other than Ian Fleming himself, who just so happened to be Lee's cousin and occasional golfing partner. With the utmost respect to both Lee and Fleming, I think that role would have been wasted on him. Dr. No in the book and film is a fairly one-dimensional villain, whereas Scaramanga was a character who could fully employ all of Lee's many talents. For a start, the idea of Lee playing an assassin is an entertaining one because, as any Lord of the Rings fan will tell you, he seems to have a suspicious familiarity with the sound someone makes when they're stabbed in the back with a knife.
I seem to recall that I did say to Peter, have you any idea of what kind of noise happens when somebody's stabbed in the back? And I said, well, because I do.
He proceeded to sort of talk about some very clandestine part of World War II. He seemed to have expert knowledge of exactly the sort of noise that they make, and so I just sort of didn't push the subject any further. I just said, well, you obviously know what to do, Christopher, so I'm sure you'll do it great.
Lee had been an intelligence officer during World War II alongside Ian Fleming himself, and I really enjoy hearing him talk about it.
When people say to me, you know, were you in this, were you in that, did you work in this, did you work in that? I always used to say, can you keep a secret? And they would say, yes, and I would say, so can I.
Now, I could go on about the insane life of Christopher Lee all day, and we will come back to him later in the video, but let's bring it back to the character of Scaramanga. He is one of only 3 Bond villains to be the title character of the movie, and with that legacy to live up to, it is clear that the man with the golden gun was trying to recapture some of what had made Goldfinger so special. As Guy Hamilton himself said,
Bond is only as good as his villain. If he's got no opposition, then what he does is pretty meaningless. The better the villains are, the better Bond is, because they make better problems for him.
So important is Scaramanga to the story that after the gun barrel, the movie opens not with Bond, but with the villain's lair on Khao Phan Khan, better known today as James Bond Island. If you go there now, it's covered with tourists and kiosks. I mean, I should know after all. But at the time of filming, it was totally isolated, and the cast and crew were hardly living their best James Bond lifestyle.
Phuket in those days was a very small native village.
You think of all the 5-star hotels we've stayed in our time. We stopped outside this place. And I thought, oh my God.
Guy Hamilton told me years and years later that in fact the building that we were in had been the local brothel.
It is here that we meet Scaramanga, who has hired someone to try and kill him as a sort of training exercise, and what I find particularly funny is that the actor playing this gangster also appears in Diamonds Are Forever.
I didn't know there was a pool down there.
Maybe Plenty O'Toole used her casino winnings to hire Scaramanga to take revenge on him. Anyway, enough worrying about Bond continuity because we get lured into Scaramanga's absolutely bizarre funhouse. And look, I was the guy who complained about the circus setting of Octopussy, so I can see why this would be an immediate turnoff for some audiences. It's outlandish and cartoonish and feels very non-Bondian, but I don't know, I just don't seem to mind it that much. Maybe it's because it's the private shooting range for Scaramanga, so its craziness is partly reflective of his personality and his upbringing in a circus, but mostly I just enjoy seeing how Scaramanga uses this arena to both draw his victim into his web and to refine his own skills as an assassin. If the pre-title sequence isn't going to feature Bond himself, then at least it can place the villain in a seemingly impossible Bondian situation and make him use his cunning and athleticism to get out of it, just like Bond would. The only thing I really find annoying about this scene is how they use a jazzy version of the score as diegetic sound, implying that Scaramanga himself wrote a song to the tune of The Man with the Golden Gun. But that does bring us to the title song, and yeah, I'm not going to defend this. Hell, even John Barry doesn't defend it, saying, "It's the least interesting Bond song. It's the one I hate the most." I don't think he's alone there. It was the first and to this day only one of 2 Bond songs to never reach the UK charts, and yeah, fair enough. You can tell they were trying to go for another Goldfinger, Shirley Bassey style ballad, but it just misses the mark. But before you blame Lulu, you should know that Alice Cooper also wrote a song of the same name for the film before they went with her, and that song is also not very good and not very Bond. Whichever way you cut it, The Man with the Golden Gun is just not a very catchy subject for a song. But I think John Barry can find a quantum of solace in the fact that, like so many of the issues with this movie, the music was rushed. He only had 3 weeks to deliver the score, and whatever you think about the title song, I actually think that the wider score for Golden Gun is pretty good. In particular, it has that fast little sting that signals the start of an action scene that never fails to get me excited. But first, we need to get the plot out of the way. 007 has been sent a golden bullet, and this is a classic Bond and M briefing scene that is typical of Guy Hamilton's very workmanlike approach to exposition.
I'd rather get over the exposition of the plot. Right, audience, listen to this because it's the last piece of exposition we're ever going to have in the picture. Once you've got that in mind, then we can forget about the plot, we can forget about long dialogue scenes, and we can rush ahead and start to have fun.
But I do love the way this scene ends, when Bond has been taken off his assignment because of fears Scaramanga is looking for and trying to kill him, and he has this little exchange with M.
If I found him first, that might change the situation.
Dramatically, wouldn't you say?
This is one of my favourite Bond-M interactions, especially that little knowing smile they share. Generally, M was perpetually annoyed at Roger Moore's James Bond, but this little moment shows us that M still respects him and sees him as a capable agent that he can trust. With the help of Q and Moneypenny, Bond follows Scaramanga's trail first to Beirut and then to Macau, where he meets an armourer called Lazar. This scene gives Bond his next lead, but it also sets up the fact that Bond is well known among the world's criminal classes.
Your reputation precedes you. This way, please.
This is true in other Bond movies as well, of course, including the Tom Mankiewicz written Diamonds Are Forever.
You don't kill James Bond and sit around waiting for the cops to arrive.
But in Golden Gun, this notoriety helps establish why Scaramanga sees Bond as such a threat, and for this scene, Bond is more than happy to play up his reputation as a deadly killer and intimidates Lazar into revealing how he delivers Scaramanga his bullets. This leads Bond to a casino, but despite that setting, we see a conscious effort here by the filmmakers to not include Bond iconography like the famous black tuxedo that audiences still associated with Sean Connery. In fact, Moore's Bond doesn't actually wear one until his 3rd movie, nor does he order a vodka martini until then.
Guy Hamilton, the one thing that he didn't want me to do in the first Bond that I did in Live and Let Die was say anything that would really be linked to Sean.
The bullets are collected by Maud Adams' Andrea Anders, and Bond follows her to Hong Kong, passing the wreck of the Queen Elizabeth liner along the way. I'm sure that won't come up later. But before we properly meet Andrea, we first encounter the lead Bond girl of the movie, Mary Goodnight, played by Swedish actress Britt Ekland.
I'd seen Ursula Andress come out of the sea with the bikini, and I just thought no one could ever look that fantastic. After having seen that, I always wanted to be a Bond girl.
Mary Goodnight is a recurring character in the Fleming novels who mostly works as a secretary in the 00 section, but here she is an MI6 staffer based in Hong Kong with whom Bond already has a prior relationship.
James, it's wonderful to see you.
I actually really like this dynamic. It's very rare for Bond to have a pre-existing relationship with the Bond girl, and so it's refreshing to see 2 characters who have clearly been working together for a long time, but who also have a more personal history.
Would I do that to you after 2 years?
Yes, you bloody well would.
I just think it helps flesh out the world of Bond a bit for him to bump into old colleagues that aren't Felix, Moneypenny or Q. But Ekland's Mary Goodnight is often cited as one of the weaker Bond girls, and a key reason why people dislike this movie, with them saying she's ditzy or annoying, and while while I can see where those criticisms come from, I think they miss the fact that that's the whole point of the character. Goodnight is very deliberately written and portrayed as the silly, naive airhead who keeps screwing things up for Bond. The movie knows that she is the stereotype of a Bond girl, and it decides to lean into that by making her the comic relief of the movie and inviting you to laugh at her expense. Like, there's a scene where she confidently rejects Bond's advances, but then she immediately sneaks into his bedroom and we have this exchange.
What made you change your mind?
I'm weak.
It's honest and it's funny, but you can only do that with a character like Goodnight. This story has a more serious and complex Bond girl in Maud Adams' character, and so it needed someone to counter that tone and also give Bond someone to roll his eyes at. Britt Ekland understood this assignment and is clearly having so much fun with the character. So while Goodnight is far from my favourite Bond girl and is hardly going to be held up as a feminist icon anytime soon, I do think that she is the funniest Bond girl to watch, except for perhaps Tiffany Case, and so for that reason, I'm Team Goodnight. But speaking of Maud Adams, we meet her character Andrea in the following scene, when Bond follows her to Hong Kong's Peninsula Hotel and interrogates her over the golden bullets. Like Goodnight, I think the character of Andrea tends to be, if not overlooked, but at least dismissed in a way that doesn't quite do her justice. Sure, she hasn't got a big role, but she is arguably the most important character to this story because she is the one who brings Bond and Scaramanga together. And although this role doesn't call for a whole lot of range, there is still a huge amount going on under the surface with her, and I think Maud Adams conveys so much of the character's vulnerability and fear in her performance.
She doesn't have a lot of choices. She is under the influence of this very, very strong man, and she's fearing for her life most of the time. I think that when I read the part, I really read it as a fairly, as a woman who was really victimized by a man.
Adams has said in later interviews that if she were to play the role again, she would try and portray her as a stronger character, and fair enough. But for me, I think this characterization helps further set up the myth that the film is slowly building around Scaramanga. We've seen how dangerous he is with a gun, but seeing it with Andrea, and it's clear that he can also manipulate and control people. And more than that, he enjoys it. But the scene where Bond interrogates Andrea is among the more controversial in the series, and it feels very inconsistent with the otherwise light-hearted tone of this movie. It's often pointed to as an example of how the series was still finding its way after Connery had left, and as Moore himself said, it was uncomfortable territory for his version of the character.
The guy, if anything, was trying to give me a harder edge, which was why he had me sort of slap Maud around. The characters I played aren't physically violent towards women, and I'm afraid in this Bond was.
Maud Adams also thought it was out of character.
Well, it was a difficult scene to do because I don't think that Roger enjoyed playing a scene where he was hitting a woman. I don't think it sat very well with him, and it's a rather serious scene, and in retrospect, when I look at that work, I think that I could have added something to the scene to make it a little bit more interesting, and not so much a scene where Bond is brutalizing a woman.
But director Guy Hamilton saw it another way.
Think seriously, I mean, if you were James Bond, just because she's a lady, would you treat her like a lady? The answer is no. I mean, you'd smack her around till she told you exactly what you wanted to know.
I think that's very much an attitude informed by his experience on Goldfinger 10 years earlier, but by the time Roger Moore came around, times had changed and so had the character. As Roger himself said,
the Bond that came after, that I did after this, would have seduced her to get the information.
Anyway, Andrea tells Bond that Scaramanga will be at the Bottoms Up Club, which is both a real place in Hong Kong and is also exactly what it sounds like. So like Bond, we're going to stay outside and wait for something to happen. And what happens is that we see Scaramanga taking aim at Bond, and the tension building in the score as he walks, oblivious to the danger until he kills someone else. It's in this scene that Bond first encounters Knick-Knack, but we'll come back to him because first Bond is apprehended by Lieutenant Hip, who we soon learn is a local MI6 agent. We also reveal that the sunken liner is the secret base for MI6 in Hong Kong, establishing a sadly short-lived trend in Moore's Bond movies of MI6 having fantastical themed bases around the world that I absolutely love. Longtime Bond designer Ken Adam was working with Stanley Kubrick on Barry Lyndon at the time Golden Gun was being made, so his apprentice Peter Merton was promoted to be the lead production designer and I think he did a great job with both this set and Scaramanga's lair at the end of the movie. The jury's still out on the Funhouse. Oh, and while we're on the subject of long-time Bond creatives not being able to work on the film, Golden Gun also had to replace its cinematographer halfway through. Ted Moore, who had worked on every Bond film besides these two, began work on Golden Gun and was the cinematographer for all of the on-location filming, but he had to leave the role after becoming sick. The production, which was still under a heavy time pressure to make its target release date, eventually convinced a very reluctant Oswald Morris to take over for the interior shooting at Pinewood Studios. So basically, every time the movie moves to an interior set like this one, we're looking through the lens of a totally different cinematographer. Personally, it's not something I have ever really noticed, but it's yet another example of the somewhat chaotic nature of this movie's production. Anyway, back in Hong Kong, we get some exposition about the assassinated man being a scientist who invented the 𝗖𝗛𝗔𝗣𝗧𝗘𝗥𝗦, which is this movie's MacGuffin. Bond suspects that his employer, a man called 𝗖𝗛𝗏, hired Scaramanga to kill the scientist and take the 𝗖𝗛𝗥𝗧𝗘𝗥𝗦. So Bond is sent off to Bangkok, but M insists that Goodnight goes with him, and Moore's reaction to that tells you everything you need to know about how much he values her.
You'll take Miss Goodnight with you.
Goodnight, sir.
In Bangkok, Bond sneaks into 𝗖𝗏𝗏's estate, and gambling that Scaramanga and 𝗖𝗏𝗏 had never met in person, he pretends to be Scaramanga through the use of the assassin's distinguishing feature.
A superfluous papilla.
A what?
A mammary gland. A third nipple, sir.
The ruse seems to work, but after Bond leaves, we reveal the real Scaramanga is already there, and Christopher Lee just gives this fantastical evil smile as Bond drives away, thinking he has won. Which of course he hasn't, because when Bond comes back to 𝗖𝗏𝗏's that evening, he's apprehended by a couple of sumo wrestlers, and of course, Nick Nack. Nick Nack is played by French actor 𝗖𝗛𝗏𝗧𝗔𝗍, and love him or hate him, you can't deny that he is by far the most unique of the Bond henchmen. Guy Hamilton said of casting him that, "I've done Oddjob, so let's go the opposite." After all, since the villain himself is more than a match for Bond, he doesn't need a henchman to do the heavy lifting. Instead, Nick Nack does everything else, and I love it how 𝗖𝗏𝗧𝗔𝗍 gives the character this innocent, friendly persona, only to then flip into someone who is prepared to run James Bond through with a trident. But 𝗖𝗏𝗏 intervenes, telling them not to kill Bond in his home, but rather,
"Take Mr. Bond to school."
And so Bond wakes up in a kung fu movie. Bruce Lee was just becoming big in the West at the time Golden Gun was being made. 1973 had seen the release of Enter the Dragon, ironically a movie heavily inspired by James Bond, but it had set box office records and very much helped spur on a craze for martial arts movies among Western audiences in the 1970s. It was this popularity that made Eon want to incorporate the genre into Golden Gun, so much of this scene was added to the screenplay in early 1974. And I'm glad it was added, because to me, this scene is one that confirms that this movie, at least the second half of this movie, is best approached more in the spirit of a Jackie Chan style action comedy rather than as a straight up spy thriller. In that spirit, we don't even pretend that Roger Moore is going to do kung fu, although there are some fantastic behind the scenes photos of him trying to do that. No, this is not a man who can do kung fu, so instead he does this. Is this where Spielberg got the inspiration for this? Maybe. Anyway, Bond then has to fight his corner against 𝗔𝗛𝗏, who is the closest thing this movie has to a typical tough guy Bond henchman. This fight feels painful in a way that not all of Moore's fistfights do, and I like watching the different fighting styles and Bond trying to hold his own against an opponent probably unlike any he's ever fought before, which is why he bravely runs away. Thankfully, Hip and his nieces are waiting outside, ready to beat the crap out of half the school. 𝗔𝗛𝗏 and the gang chase after them, and for some reason Hip doesn't notice that Bond doesn't get into the car, leaving him to flee to the boat. This chase was filmed in and around the canals of Bangkok, which at the time were extraordinarily polluted stretches of water that, despite their best efforts, several members of the cast, including Moore himself, ended up submerged in.
There's one sequence where the boat goes around a corner. I went in, and I had to open my eyes to make sure that that propeller didn't hit me. And I saw all sorts of things on the bottom. There was an undertaker's shop on the corner. And I think some of the bodies they threw in the bottom of the clong. It was very unpleasant.
The boat chase is one of the highlights of the movie for me, and although it's nowhere near as long, intricate, or as exciting as the one in Live and Let Die, there is still a speed and energy here that comes from the narrow waterways, the bustling activity on the banks, and the small, rapid little boats that zip along like this. Or at least they do once Bond has had a bit of help from the locals.
20 fast and back!
Just a quick side note, but the Really 007 podcast actually managed to track down 𝗖𝗛𝗔𝗍𝗧𝗘𝗥𝗦, who played this part as a child. This was particularly impressive considering that he was not credited in the movie, which is a shame because even though he's just got this one very short scene, you can't deny that Elephant Boy is one of the quirkier of the Bond side characters.
Bloody tourists! Bring me garbage
But speaking of quirky Bond side characters... Sheriff J.W. Pepper. Love him or more likely loathe him, Louisiana's Finest is back again. It may be hard to believe, but apparently he was a very popular character from Live and Let Die, which is why they chose to bring him back here. In fact, the producers thought that he was so much of a drawcard that in the trailer for the movie, the character gets his own calling card and is also more highly billed than Christopher Lee. But if it's any consolation to Pepper haters, screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz very much did not want him back.
Yeah, no one should have ever brought back J.W. Pepper. It was just that audiences loved him so much in Live and Let Die that they decided to bring him back. He was never in my scripts. I think it was, in essence, an excess. He just seemed pointless and atrocious in The Man with the Golden Gun.
It's hard to disagree with him on that. He is very much at place in Louisiana, but the idea that this character would take a holiday to Thailand in the 1970s is about as unbelievable as the idea that he's a Democrat.
Elephant? They're Democrats, Maybelle.
But if Sheriff Pepper is a divisive character, then fear not, because the next scene is the first time we really get to see Scaramanga for an extended period of time. Even people who strongly dislike this movie acknowledge that Lee's Scaramanga is an absolute standout. In fact, it's not uncommon for people to criticize the movie for the fact that the villain is so good that he ends up overshadowing Bond, and it is hard to disagree with that. I love Roger Moore, but will be the first to admit that this is not his best performance as 007. He feels quite stiff in the role and lacks some of the energy and spontaneity that would characterize his later turns as the character. Contrast that with Lee, who is just having so much fun with this character in a way that means he is always drawing focus from Bond whenever he's on screen. He is so compelling as Scaramanga, and his credit to director Guy Hamilton with helping him find the character.
He got something out of me as an actor which I've never been able to show on screen. In his own words, he got the spook out of me. He got the Dracula out of me. He's getting me to do this picture in such a light way that you can hardly believe this man is as lethal as he is. He's getting me to smile. He's getting me to laugh, which I must admit I don't find very easy as an actor. He's getting the lightness of performance out of me, the contrasts.
We see those contrasts in this scene as he calmly speaks to Hi-Fat while secretly assembling his famous golden gun, which is the closest thing this movie has to a Q-branch style gadget. By the time Hi-Fat realizes, it's too late, and with the most sinister grin imaginable, Lee kills him and takes the Solex. This scene shows us the duality of Scaramanga, a man who is intelligent, manipulative, and who relishes in the fact that he has won, followed immediately by the cold, dead eyes of an assassin when he pulls the trigger. Scaramanga is the dark side of Bond for the simple reason that he takes pleasure from killing. He enjoys it. He enjoys the power it gives him over other people. Bond, meanwhile, very much just sees it as a means to an end, and this was something that Roger Moore in particular used as the basis for the character.
I'd read a couple of the Bond novels, and when I finally was asked to play Bond, I went back and to try and find out where Bond came from. And I only ever came across one clue about him, but was that he's, beginning of one book, it said he had returned from a mission. He didn't particularly like killing, but he took pride in doing his job well.
Oh, and something else Roger Moore used to say was that he always wanted to play a Bond villain because they always have the best lines. This is very much the case here because, like Bond, Scaramanga also finishes his scenes with a quippy remark, but while Bonds are funny, Scaramangas are absolutely ruthless.
He always did like that mausoleum. Put him in it.
Oh, he's so damn good, and by this time we are halfway through the movie and Bond has yet to meet the villain, but we the audience have had several scenes devoted entirely to setting him up as a foe to be reckoned with. Back at the hotel, Bond and Goodnight suffer through a glass of Phu Yak, and as we've seen, they end up in his hotel room. But before they can get it on, Andrea arrives. This is another scene that just emphasizes the fact that Goodnight is very much intended to be the butt of the joke, as we have this farce of a scene play out with Bond hiding her under the sheets and then in the wardrobe.
You have to sort of be laughing at it yourself when you're doing it, because this is sort of ridiculous, it's so unreal.
But while the scene with Goodnight is a bit of a comedy, it doesn't quite mesh with the tone of Andrea's half of the scene. She has come to warn Bond that he is in danger from Scaramanga, and reveals that she was the one who sent Bond the golden bullet at the start of the film in the hope that he'd be able to kill Scaramanga and set her free from him. It's a scene in which her character is very vulnerable, and given everything we know about her, it's jarring to go from this,
"Please believe me, I'm risking my life to come here. I want him dead. Name your price, anything, I'll pay it,"
to Bond shoving Goodnight in a cupboard for a couple of hours while he and Andrea get to know each other. But at least Goodnight shares in the indignity of it all.
I'm resigning in the morning.
We move on to a Thai boxing match, and it is here that Bond and Scaramanga finally meet. Bond meets Andrea to get the Solex as agreed, but realizes that she has been shot and killed by the man himself.
A difficult shot, but most gratifying.
Having revealed himself to Bond, Scaramanga speaks to him as he would an old friend.
I feel I know you, although I never thought we should ever really meet.
He tells Bond of his life, which is broadly similar to that of the character in the novel, and as he does so, Bond notices the Solex has fallen to the ground. He manages to pass it off to Hip, while Scaramanga reveals with glee the first time he ever shot and killed someone.
The man emptied the gun into his eye. I emptied my stage pistol into his.
Hip passes the Solex on to Goodnight, while Scaramanga leaves Bond, warning him not to follow him. Of course, he ignores that, as does Goodnight, who tails Knick-Knack to the car, only to be abducted by Scaramanga. And this leads to a line reading by Britt Ekland that somehow lives rent-free in my head.
Somebody locked me in a boat.
But more importantly for the plot, it means this.
Oh, I've got the keys. And I've got the Solex too.
As he always does, Bond adapts and improvises and steals a car from a conveniently placed AMC dealership. And as if Sheriff Pepper being on holiday in Thailand wasn't a contrivance enough, for some reason he also decided to test drive a new car while he was there. But Pepper or not, I really enjoy this car chase through the streets of Bangkok. It feels so raw and real with the cars skidding around on these busy, wide streets and crashing and mountain curbs. It's just so energetic and frantic and very much follows in the spirit of the chases in Live and Let Die and Diamonds Are Forever. I like contrasting those chases to the ones in the likes of Goldfinger and Thunderball, which, while exciting and groundbreaking in their own ways, did rely quite a lot on techniques like speed ramping and rear projection. Golden Gun goes to show how far action filmmaking had come in just a few years, particularly since Bullet set the new gold standard for car chases in 1968. But of course, the highlight of this chase and the big stunt in the movie is the spiral jump. The stunt was originally designed by Raymond McHenry, and the filmmakers had seen it being performed at auto shows in the US, so they licensed it and worked it into Golden Gun. The ramps were specially designed in the computer to gauge the perfect angle, and the car was modified so that stunt driver Bumps Willett was in the center of the vehicle to keep it balanced. It was the first time he had ever attempted the stunt, and he was doing it over a river.
And we talked about if the car failed, if the takeoff ramp broke, that we would have a driver in a seatbelt and a three-point restraining harness in the water. We put a crane out of camera's view. The divers were underwater with a cable and with a hook, because we could have had the car and the driver out of the water quicker than just going in after the driver.
Oh, he could easily have been killed. Easily.
Well, in just a single take, he pulled it off. In fact, he pulled it off so well that Cubby Broccoli thought it looked so clean that people would think it was fake, and asked Willett for another take, which he quite rightly refused to do. But my favourite story about this stunt is this.
I still have a great picture and vivid memory of Roger Moore coming up to the driver and to me with tears in his eyes saying, "You fellas really made me look good."
Every time I hear a story about Roger Moore, it just builds my respect for him. What a fantastic ambassador for James Bond he was. But of course, you can't talk about this stunt without talking about the infamous slide whistle. Poor John Barry, he really couldn't catch a break on this movie. It was in fact his decision to put that effect in originally, even though Cubby Broccoli disagreed. I think it must have been because the wider scene is fairly comedic in its tone, and that will have influenced his call to put that sound in. But like with the title song, it was something Barry himself would admit was a mistake.
Earlier on, if I'd have seen that car go up over that thing, I'd have played it for all it was worth. There's a really dangerous moment, and that was the true James Bond style. I broke the golden rule, actually, and Cubby was absolutely right.
Moving on, and Bond follows Scaramanga to a barn, which turns out to be a secret hangar for his car plane, because of course he has a secret car plane.
It's only a model. Shh.
Bond then tracks Scaramanga using Goodnight's homing beacon, and it is here that we see Phang Nga Bay in all of its glory. It's a beautiful part of the world, and this scene of Bond flying low over the islands is a wonderful little interlude that just lets us marvel at the location for a while as we move into the third act. Bond arrives on the island and is met by a gleeful Scaramanga, but rather than being evil and threatening, here the villain is effortlessly charming and friendly.
A harmless toy.
He knows that he is in complete control and is absolutely relishing the fact that he holds all the cards, but despite that, he still views Bond as an equal and as a kindred spirit.
We have so much in common, Mr. Bond. We have so much to discuss.
You get the sense that Scaramanga is not a person who respects many other people, which is why he is so excited to have Bond in his clutches.
Ours is the loneliest profession, so let us spend a few pleasant hours together.
It's here as well that we're reunited with Goodnight, who, for plot reasons, is now dressed like this.
I like a girl in a bikini. No concealed weapons.
This dinner scene is among my favourite dialogue scenes in all of the Bond series. It's just such a joy to watch Lee and Moore sparring against each other, and watching the growing tension between Bond and Scaramanga, with the villain still very much seeing Bond as a brother-in-arms at the start.
To us, Mr. Bond, we are the best.
But Bond pushes back on Scaramanga.
There's a useful four-letter word, and you're full of it.
Until this moment, Scaramanga had seen Bond as a peer not just because he was a killer, but he assumed that any other professional killer like him would also relish and enjoy the job like he does.
You get as much fulfillment out of killing as I do, so why didn't you admit it?
He seems surprised when Bond pushes back on that suggestion, and there's a really telling moment when Bond suggests that Scaramanga is not a gentleman, and he gets visibly angry. He feels almost betrayed that Bond does not share in his sense of professional admiration. So Scaramanga challenges Bond to a duel as the ultimate test.
A duel between titans.
And once again, Scaramanga the villain gets the best line.
6 bullets to your 1. I only need 1.
And so the stage is set for the final showdown that we have been building towards for the entire movie. In one of the most beautiful Bond locations of them all, Knick-Knack counts out the 20 paces, and this scene is just so well done with the cross-cutting and the rising tension in the score until...
20!
In the final cut of the film, Bond follows Scaramanga inside to the funhouse, but there's a deleted scene that shows the pair still on the beach, and Bond makes a rudimentary bomb out of the wreckage of the plane. Only a fraction of this scene survives, but it's fascinating because it completely changes Scaramanga's character by revealing him to be a cheat.
Now I know how you do it, Scaramanga. The secret of success, Mr. Bond. Never take chances.
And I shoot the bottle. And of course that tells him right away that I did have another bullet, and I'm still there behind the rock.
Christopher Lee goes on to say in the commentary that he liked the scene because he thought Scaramanga cheating was entirely in character and thought it made him even more dislikable as a villain, but I disagree. I think the tension of the final duel comes from Scaramanga only having the one bullet, and that for all of his other faults, he did want a relatively fair fight against James Bond. Sure, he has the home turf advantage, but I feel that the character as he is written and portrayed in the final cut of the movie would derive his professional satisfaction not just from winning, but from the fact that, well,
I only need 1.
Anyway, the scene was cut and instead Bond is led into the funhouse from the start of the movie. But Bond being Bond, he quickly works it out and climbs around the set and out of view of the cameras, fooling Knick-Knack and Scaramanga. Like in the pre-credit scene, we then swap to Scaramanga's point of view as he stalks the room in search of Bond. We can tell that he's unsettled, having lost his advantage. John Barry's music once again builds the tension as he creeps into the same room where he struck the killing blow at the start of the movie. But this time, of course, the tables have turned. Yep, Bond disguised as a mannequin of himself shoots and kills Scaramanga once and for all. But this is not the last we have seen of Francisco Scaramanga, because Christopher Lee returned to the role 30 years later for the video game GoldenEye: Rogue Agent.
I'm Francisco Scaramanga.
Lee lent his likeness to Scaramanga in that game while also voicing the character. I just wanted to mention this because I love that he had the opportunity to return to this wonderful character decades later, even if the dialogue he had to work with is, well, from a video game.
The magnetic hack feature will allow you to tamper with machines and electronics from a distance.
Coming back to the movie though, Scaramanga's death is noteworthy because he is the only person Bond kills in this entire movie, which is the same number of people that Goodnight kills. I wonder if there's any other movie in the series where the Bond girl kills as many people as Bond himself does. Maybe Wei Lin, but she's quite a different character from Goodnight. Anyway, her attempt at escaping, like her attempt at most other things in the movie, ends up causing more harm than good as it sets off the reactor. Bond desperately tries to retrieve the Solex while Goodnight quite literally asses things up for him. This scene with him in the path of the laser as the clouds slowly creep past is such a nail-biter, and I think it's brilliant that this whole finale continues to escalate the tension even after the villain is dead. Bond and Goodnight escape by the skin of their teeth and make a quick getaway from the island in a type of vessel that is famously slow and lumbering. And it wouldn't be a Tom Mankiewicz written Bond movie if it didn't have the henchman interrupt the celebratory romance, so an aggrieved Knick-Knack launches himself on Bond. This scene is played for comedy, and we know that Bond is never really in any danger here, and so he quickly dispatches of him, and then he ends the movie with the best use of a Bond girl's name until the world is not enough.
Good night.
Good night, sir.
If you've watched some of my other James Bond videos, then you'll know that I'm generally someone who prefers my Bond films at the more serious end of the spectrum. But I think that is part of the reason I enjoy The Man with the Golden Gun so much. It is such a contrast in tone and style from those entries in the series, and yet it still has all the trappings of a great Bond adventure. A beautiful location, a menacing and compelling villain, fantastic action, it really does have it all. Well, except for a good song, but hey, no one's perfect. I understand why this movie is not a top 10 entry for many Bond fans, and when you think about the rushed production and the various other behind the scenes challenges that this movie faced, you can see why it didn't quite come together as neatly as some of the more well-regarded Bond movies. But if you're like me, you will find yourself coming back to this movie over and over again, and every time you do, those flaws just melt away and it will just send you right back to being 10 years old and loving how entertaining this movie is. So as far as I'm concerned, if you just want a fun, silly, simple, and family-friendly James Bond adventure, then The Man with the Golden Gun will get it done.
James, you must be good.
This video has come to its glittering end, but with all this talk of Bond rankings, you might be interested to know that I will be publishing my very own ranking of all 25 Eon Bond films on Patreon at the end of the year. Patreon helps keep videos like this one sponsor-free for everyone, and tiers start at just $1. There's heaps of great stuff over there like bonus videos and behind-the-scenes commentaries, so if you liked this video, please feel free to check that out. Thank you so much to my patrons, and thank you for watching. Good night.